Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of CCC Talks with Mark O'Loughlin and the Cloud Credential Council. Really excited. Today, we're joined by John deVadoss, President and Head of Development at Neo Blockchain. John, thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast.
Hello, Mark. Thank you very much. It is my privilege to be here with you. So I really appreciate you making time for me. Thank you.
Thanks. And now, John, you've had a very varied career like most people we have on these sessions to date. Architect, General Manager of Digital at Microsoft. I was very interested in the next bit in brackets, including building parts of Azure. We'll come back on that shortly. And
Certainly.
co-founder of machine learning company, amongst others. Now, if that's not enough, where do you get the time? And a PhD in machine learning. John, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You're too kind. So I think the word varied is a euphemism. It's a euphemism for somebody who can't quite focus on one thing for too long.
Yeah.
With that said, so my interests lie in the platform space, Mark. I've
Mhm.
spent much of my professional career in the platform sector across a variety of industries. So certainly machine learning and AI, more recently in the blockchain platform and stack
Yeah.
space. Earlier on with Microsoft, I spent many years architecting and working on the early .NET platforms, V1, V2. And as you mentioned, also spent time working on Azure long before it was called Azure. It was called Red Dog. That was the
Yes.
code name at that time. And the some folks might remember that, and some folks might not. But yeah, Red Dog it was at that time, many years ago. But thank you.
That's great. I was involved with a company way back when Azure Beta was released, and at the time, and looking at it, and I was, looking at it and how what it developed into. The same with the other cloud providers. They start off with a certain core of services, but then over time, customer requirements, how it evolves, and it just keeps evolving. So great to see in the cloud space. We have lots of different players in there. We've got some of the big tier ones, lots of medium tiers. Not everybody involved in just the infrastructure. We've a lot of platform and SaaS and all this. We're going to
Correct.
talk about one of these type of platforms now in a moment. I wanted to just jump into this session talking about blockchain. So you're involved in a company at the moment that's doing a lot with blockchain. I think you've many years of this. I wanted to not ask you much about what is blockchain. We've had other people cover that, but pose this question to you and see what you think. You know, blockchain is all things crypto and ledger. So people that understand a little bit about blockchain from our other episodes will now understand what words crypto and ledger mean. But is blockchain that simple? Is it just a bit of crypto, a little bit of ledger, blockchain? That's all it is. Or what else is under the hood?
So it can be. I mean, I think it's a very insightful question, Mark. Absolutely. You know, if you look at it as kind of the yin and the yang, or the two sides of the coin, one side is the crypto, and many of us as consumers certainly see the crypto perspective. The other side of it, you know, as a technologist, as a geek, as a developer, you see the ledger side, which is, if you will, the platform aspects, the
Yeah.
stack, the new substrate, if you will. But I think the magic, Mark, really is how these two come together. You know, if we only see one side, at best, we see, you know, about half the value. For me, the magic, and this is where I still believe much of the commercial industry, the enterprise space, for instance, is still grappling to come to terms, is because they only see one side. They see the substrate, they see the
Mm.
platform, but it is the economic platform, Mark. Blockchain is the very first economic platform in history ever. And if we can grok that, then we will see why this is such a significant shift with respect to technology platforms.
Great. I'm going to get to the economic part in a moment. I'm very interested in your views on that. But before we go there, I just thought anytime we talk about these technologies, we generally ask an expert a typical question like this, you know, to help our listeners, what is a good working definition to use in describing what blockchain is from your perspective?
So I would say a good working definition would be a decentralized platform to enable this next generation of applications with one key shift, which is we have economic incentives baked into the platform. No other platform in history has economic incentives baked into the platform. And so I would say, to summarize, the first economic platform would be a good way if you want a pithy phrase to think about the blockchain world.
Great. That's a new kind of view we've had of blockchain, which is good. And that's why we've asked you on, because you do talk a lot about this being economic platform baked in. I'm very interested in getting to know a little bit more about that for our listeners. So it leads me on to I've seen you talk a lot. I've heard a lot. It's really good stuff. You talk about blockchain. You've done it today as a platform for having the economic model built in and baked in and being the extra bit. Can
Yeah.
you expand for listeners? What is that economic model? What is it? What does it do? How does it benefit them?
Absolutely. So let's go back again to the commercial world. Let's look at the enterprise world, right? Which you're very familiar, and certainly I am, having spent many years, right? Let's look
Yeah.
at a typical enterprise scenario. No enterprise lives alone. No enterprise is an island. There is always a collection of entities who work together in some fashion. There's partnerships, there's collaboration, there is consortia. Today,
Hmm.
much of the apps, the infrastructure that powers this mark is running on centralized platforms like the cloud, for example. The cloud was, obviously has transformed, truly disrupted, if you will, the
Yes.
world as we know it, as we see it. However, it is very much a centralized platform, if you will. But the key here is this: when you have collaboration, when you have partnership, when you have multiple commercial entities working together, there is always incentives. Incentives, and the flip side, penalties. Incentives when they deliver, or in terms of raising the bar of performance, and penalties when there is obviously a failure
Hmm.
or otherwise a degradation of quality with respect to delivery. In today's world, these incentives have to be extrinsically added in as an overlay, as an adjunct, as an accessory. And what makes the blockchain platform unique, which is why I call this the first economic platform, is
Yep.
because we have the crypto economic protocols baked inside. The incentives are intrinsic, they are innate, and so there is nothing we have to do that is an adjunct or an accessory or an extrinsic or an add-on to ensure. So to make it concrete, let's take an example. I live in Seattle, and Seattle is the home of some of the largest coffee companies in the world, right?
Yes.
And so you look at the coffee bean, right? The coffee bean comes from Tanzania, from Colombia, from Ethiopia, and eventually makes its way, as coffee up here in Seattle. So you look at this network. There are providers and consumers. There are distributors. There are the small farmers, and everybody participates in this network because
Yes.
they see a benefit to them. And this benefit is obviously built on a model of incentives. In today's world, these incentives, again, are extrinsic. They're added on. I'm sure your listeners are very familiar with the word governance. Governance is a much used and much abused term, right? Governance.
Yeah.
So again, I don't want to go too far down that rat hole, but governance. Mark, how many millions and tens of millions, or even billions of dollars have we spent on governance over the last 5, 7, 10 years? Tremendous
Yes.
amount of money. Why? Because governance is critical for the functioning enterprise, for the functioning consortia. But governance is expensive. It is error
Hmm.
prone because we add this on. We hire expensive consultants. We invest in tools and vendors who
Yeah.
promise, this silver bullet in terms of aligning IT and business and so on. Why? Because the stacks we are working off of do not expose an intrinsic economic substrate. With a blockchain platform, because it is built on a foundation of crypto economic protocols, the incentives are there, right there. We have to turn the switches on. And so you think about not just the cost saving, the amount of money that's gone into governance and compliance, but you look at the upside, the potential to transform, to truly change how we reward, And I say rewards and incentives, but the flip side is obviously penalties as well. How do we
Yes, yes.
ensure, right, that the right contributions are obviously, compensated or not?
There is that element of how do you ensure some key things in there. As you said, so many organizations are doing, let's say, governance, but the key word you used was bolted on towards the end, which never works. The auditing of a supply chain end to end, or the parts that get audited by different organizations at different times, very expensive, huge overhead. It's driven an industry in itself, the auditing industry. As you said, send in the consultants there. We know they charge a lot. But what are they trying to achieve? I think if you get in the helicopter and fly up and think, what is all this doing? It comes back to trust in that ecosystem. Are people doing what they're meant to do, what they've set out to do in contracts? Where they deliver, they get rewarded. Where they don't, they get penalized. That's the way of the world. I come across the coffee bean example in blockchain about 2 years ago. I was at a conference and I saw a tech conference, and in the corner a coffee bean stand. It wasn't selling coffee. It was they're saying we're a coffee company driven entirely by tech. I said, tell me your story. And they said from bean to cup, they can trace all their supply chain. They're doing it for an ethical reason, all the way through from that farmer to make sure he gets paid. They get whatever dollars per sack of beans into the next stage of the cycle, into the next stage. That all the way along, all of this is recorded, reported. He gets paid automatically. It moves to the next stage. The auditing is in built. They didn't have to build an auditing system. They switched on the levers they wanted to use, like what you've said. And from bean to cup, they can show their entire supply chain. They show it online. They say, this is how transparent, this is what we pay the farmers, this is the going rate, this is what we pay, this is what we get, this is what happened. This company said they deliver X, they delivered Y, they get plus or minus all the way back. And they said, does it help them sell a cup of coffee? Yes or no? What it helps them is, again, they say, are we in the business of selling coffee, or are we in the business of giving somebody an experience of a nice beverage and whatever that is? If you're in a Starbucks, then it's the surroundings. They say we want to amplify the brand of the company rather than anything else. And we're using blockchain. And I asked about cost, and he said, oh, this is a lot cheaper than the auditing system we had before, because your word was, it's baked in. So I think that's a really good example. And I think, as I said, there's an economic model in there now. It's not just about using blockchain as technology. It's about what do you get out of this economic model. Slightly, again, it's not about using cloud for the sake of using cloud. It's about using cloud to get, I would not say cost savings on cloud, because that's now been proven you generally don't, if that's what you're looking for. But you get agility, speed, ability to scale, ability to downsize and ramp up, and all this kind of stuff. So you get value from using a cloud. It shouldn't be about the monetary cost savings. I think with blockchain now, we have a really good example of that economic model that's built in. Um, so are there any other examples of organizations using blockchain? So we spoke about, say, the coffee bean to cup. Are there any other examples you're coming across, or you're involved in even, where blockchain is going to change or do something really good, really radical?
Oh, absolutely, Mark. Absolutely. I mean, the way I would say this, is there any industry today that is not in some fashion or the other looking at or using blockchain technology, whether it be the legal industry in terms of contracts,
Yeah.
and certainly leveraging smart contracts, or the healthcare. Currently, as we are going through this virus situation in terms of drugs and pharma, and being able to audit and verify,
Yes.
the lineage, obviously, of the drug industry all the way to the sources, or it could be the food industry in terms of looking at and being able to somehow guarantee the source, and again that trace the lineage of where it's making its way through our supply chain, as we discussed. Global trade, finance is being significantly disrupted by
Yes.
the world of blockchain capabilities, both within and across national boundaries and borders. So I would say, you look at the space, there is not any one area, Mark. And here is why, by the way. Here is why. I'll give you an example, right? Today, let's not name a cloud provider, but let's just pick anybody, anybody in the Seattle area, for example, right?
Yes.
So the bill, right? When you have multiple parties working together and there is an application or an infrastructure set of capabilities, there is still only one bill, right? The bill is sent by the vendor to one entity. And
Yes.
this is 2020, right? The fact that we are still billing one entity is, to me, a manifestation of still the progress we have to make. So when there is multi-party, for me, another way to think about blockchain, Mark, is this is the stack for multi-party transactions innately, right? So any place where there are multiple parties transacting is a place to exploit, to use the blockchain capabilities. And so for me, to your question, absolutely. There is not one industry, not one vertical, not one sector that is not at this point working with or somehow using the blockchain
Mm.
capability. Public sector, private sector, collaboration. And last but not the least, I mean, you look at the economic forces, right? Central banks, they're very much in the news today, for good reasons and not so good reasons, right? I hope I don't want to see the Fed in the news, but they are in the news.
Yeah.
Every major central bank across the world at this point, Mark, is looking at using blockchain capability as they are digitizing their own currencies. So I would say at this point, it is pervasive. If
Mm.
there is an industry that is not looking at blockchain technology, uh, they, they will regret it.
Absolutely. I think it goes on to the next question that I think, do organizations actually understand what blockchain is, its potential, what it can do? Or is that one of the challenges we have at the moment in them kind of thinking a little bit different or looking and saying, well, we should be able to apply this. You said it there, multi-contract, multiplayer environments should just use blockchain because it gives that transparency between all those transactions. I can tell you a lot of organizations in those environments aren't even thinking about blockchain or what to do with it. So, going back to the question, do you think organizations in general understand blockchain to that level, or have they yet to get to that level of understanding?
So I would say some do, Mark, some do, but I still think the majority do not. And here is why. Here's why. I have a very simple reason for this. As an IT guy, for me, I grew up with this term of replatforming. And so
Hmm.
what this means is we have applications, and each time there is a new platform, we talk about replatforming.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the history of computing going back 40, 50 years, there was no economic replatforming. It was always infrastructure replatforming. So what this means is the early adopters still see the blockchain stack as yet another replatforming. And so
Yes.
we are thinking about the technology capabilities, but most of us yet are to come to terms with the economic incentives. Again, why? Because as IT people, we don't think about incentives on a daily or even a weekly basis. We leave it to somebody else. And unless and until we think about the incentives and the incentive model, I call this, Mark, enterprise architecture is what, about 35 years old, 40 years old, back to
Yeah.
John Zachman. Mark, we need a new enterprise economic architecture. And until every enterprise has an enterprise economic architecture, they will not fully realize the benefits of blockchain capabilities. And to your question, yes, there is a minority out there, but many of us are yet to come to terms to
Mhm.
realize the potential of the economic stack.
So that's an economic enterprise architecture. I
Correct.
think that's fantastic. I know what you're saying with that, and absolutely, it ties in with, again, IT function in an organization should be delivering value, not tech. It's not about the tech anymore. We've moved away from IT as a technology provider, IT as whatever it has been in the past. It's about getting the value and delivering and helping the business achieve what it wants to do or achieve things it doesn't even know it wants to do at the moment, and
Correct.
taking care of the technology side, but translating the technology into the business, because the business won't be able to do that. They're not, and that's not their job. And I think, to me, blockchain, cloud, IoT, all these new digital technologies give a great opportunity to that IT function in any organization to look at it, not talk to the business about technology, but talk about value, solutions, things, and working with the business to come up with ideas. Not that IT has to come up with the answer or the business, but collectively, let's take the example of that coffee bean and how we can apply that to our organization. We'll take care of how we pull the levers in the blockchain from a technological side, but here's the common goal we want, and that goal and vision has to be business orientated. But
Absolutely.
I see far too many companies looking at blockchain saying, hey, what will we do with blockchain? What can we do? And about 3 or 6 months later, after the whiteboard sessions, go, well, we don't know. We'll move on to IoT next week and see what we can do there. I think that's the wrong way to look at it.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, you nail it on the head. I mean, it's the outcomes, right? It's about business outcomes. IT
Yeah,
needs to be obsessed with business outcomes, and
I
until
love that.
we get there, we're going to see technology as another tool in the toolbox, and we
Yes.
will struggle with it. By the way, Mark, I'm working on a book on enterprise economic architecture, so you'll have my first copy when I'm done with it.
Fantastic. Oh well, I love free copies of anything, so send away. Do tell us more about that. I'll talk to you again about it when you're doing a release. Let's get you back. I want to drill into that book. I want to look at it. So
Definitely.
we'll have you back, John, and we'll talk a bit more about that. Um,
Thank you, sir.
you said something there. It's important. You said, I would have said, a lot of people I talked to would have said IT should be focused on business outcomes. You've ratcheted that up a notch. You said IT should be obsessed with business outcomes. I love that. I'm changing how I talk to people now, because I understand it's not about focus, it's about the obsession of it. I think that's where we have to be. And I think, especially in today, we're in challenging times at the moment. There's a global crisis going on. People might be looking at this saying, or organizations saying, look, we're in survival mode. What can blockchain do for us? Can that project, and move on to something else? However, maybe there's an opportunity for people to think, look, we're in crisis mode. We need to get 80% of the company looking at survival, but survival won't keep us going into the new world. Maybe carve out some people looking at this type of technology as to how can we use this to fix some of the challenges we've had in the past, do something new, and adapt to. There's a new world coming and we don't know what it is, but we certainly cannot bring the legacy, say auditing and all that other stuff that we've done in the past, into this new world. We don't have the time, people, money, resources. It's going to be difficult. So maybe things like blockchain give companies a chance to speed up what they can achieve with it during these
Absolutely.
times.
Absolutely. So I would say two things, and I think you make a very, very relevant point, Mark. Two things. You're right. In times like this, it can certainly be easy to go back and say, look, I'm going to just shut down and focus on what I can, and I'm going to, this is going to be, woe is me. But it is those companies who look to tomorrow and the day after and see the potential.
Yes,
As human beings, we encounter challenges, but we take care of them. We move forward, and it's going to be those
yes,
entities that will be successful tomorrow and the day after. The second thing I want to make is, I think if there's one thing, it is the fragile nature of the supply chain that is so obvious to many of us, including
yeah,
consumers, right? And we can say, look, we will not use the supply chain, but that would be, I think, in some sense, almost like cutting off your nose to spite your, right? The key is going to be, how do we, as Taleb would say, make this anti-fragile, right? How
yes,
do we make this robust? How do we, and it's about trust. The challenge that's facing us is trust. If there is
mhm,
one platform, one stack that can help us rethink, reimagine, and rebuild the supply chain from a place of trust, so we do not have this fragile nature once again down the line. I firmly believe it's going to be built on a foundation of blockchain capabilities.
I can see that. I'll come back on the trust in a moment. I have a question for you on that. But regarding supply chain, I mean, it's so evident now, global crisis, airplanes are grounded, factories are closed. To make T-shirts, it's amazing how much cotton gets flown halfway around the world and back
True.
again before it gets turned into a garment that's flown back around the world. That these
True.
supply chains, globalization has built up this it's massive global supply chain, but it seems to have kind of ground to a halt. And again, I'm wondering as well for companies in these supply chain situations, what blockchain can pose to set up the new supply chain of what will be tomorrow. Now, typically that could take an industry 5, 10, 15 years to use technology like blockchain to do that. I think this global crisis has accelerated organizations' use of tech by 5 to 10 years. We've been pulled into the future by about 10 years. So it's a case of not thinking and sitting around and should we use this? I think for a lot of companies' survival, it will be we've got to use this, we've got to do things quicker, smarter, better than before. As you said, trust, transparency, economic model in blockchain. We've got things like IoT that can do wonderful things in health. We're seeing that how to look after thousands and thousands or tens of thousands of people outside of the hospital and the surgery environments using IoT. But we wouldn't have been able to do that in the past because of trust. But now, out of necessity, if you can't go to your doctor and you're ill, but you can put these sensors on and they can monitor you, they can see, okay, you're doing fine, but this patient somewhere else isn't. So we'll give them focus and then you recover. That's great. You don't recover, you get worse, you get looked at. So I think it's pulled us into, and I think organizations need to realize that technology is always ahead of where we are in business and as people, and we're doing catch up. Remember, we asked the question, what is blockchain? Most companies can't answer that. But we're in a situation where we have the technologies of the future today,
Yeah.
and companies and the situation due to global crisis has pulled us 10 years into the future in an instant. So doing things how we did it yesterday, I don't think is going to get us where we need to be tomorrow. And I think
Absolutely.
technologies here is good. Can I ask, at the moment, what advice would you give to companies trying to get that competitive advantage or trying to retool how they do things? What do they need to focus on? What are the one or two things they should focus on today when you consider blockchain?
Great question. Great question. So I would say two things. Firstly, again, thinking about the architecture and certainly what I call the enterprise economic architecture, incentives, rewards, and obviously penalties to be able to have some way that you can bake this in because the platform gives it to you. The second
Yes,
thing, you made a very, very relevant point, Mark, about, you spoke about the healthcare industry and trust and rebuilding trust. For me, as an individual, as a citizen, as a human being, the flip side of this is privacy. I think it's very clear to us, especially in this particular phase we are going through, that privacy of the individual is paramount. So I would
yes,
say for companies looking at the blockchain stack, please do not forget that this is a platform of trust. It's also a platform built on privacy, on the rights of the individual. And
yes.
we have this ability to not again have to go through and reinvent the wheel. We have this baked in again intrinsically in it in the stack. And as we rebuild, I would want to emphasize this could be for you as a commercial entity a competitive advantage. It could be a
Mm.
competitive advantage, right, to promise to deliver to your customers and your consumers.
I think that's important. Yes, we probably tend to forget the privacy piece or think that bit is baked in. An element of privacy is baked in, but as any organization, you are responsible and accountable at the end of the day for the privacy, security of your customers' information. You can never really outsource that, but certainly there are parts of blockchain that are set up to help with that. But certainly, I think, yeah, you've got to look at that, especially in health, bank, anything supply chain. Absolutely, you've got to look at that. And that could even be privacy of another part of blockchain, say the cloud it's built on or something like that. You have to go through and it goes back to your architecture as
True.
well as this view. Now, I have a question here, kind of based on trust. So, blockchain is very interesting in that you said it's built on providing trust and transparency, and we know that's what it's all about. But ironically, can blockchain actually be trusted? What do you
Oh,
think?
fantastic question. So, insofar as we trust the math and the algorithms, we can trust
Yes.
the blockchain architecture. However, there is one caveat. You know, not every chain is alike, right? There are different architectures, there are different models of consensus, for example. So
Yes.
I would
Yes.
say, yes, we trust the math, or at least we want to trust the math, but certainly examine, for instance, the protocols for consensus. Ensure it meets and certainly exceeds your needs with respect to, again, the degrees of trust and the layers of privacy you want to build in. Of course, these are open source stacks. For example, Neo, MIT license on GitHub. Certainly, the source is out there. But very good point you make, Mark. Very good point. Again, I think as a very famous president once said, trust but verify. So certainly ensure that your team, that your technologists and your economists are able to verify the stack that it meets your
Yeah.
needs, right? We want to be particularly careful because this is about trust. It is about privacy of the individual and delivering on that promise. So absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it tells us the story of the evolution of IT and all this technology. We're now at a stage where organizations do not need to build clouds and blockchains and all these IoT. They're already there.
Yeah,
So as an IT function, we no longer have to kind of build these systems. We now have to use them. So the focus is less on, now there's a huge amount of technical skill required to architect and integrate all of these IT things. But we're not having to build them, we're having to use them and understand how to use them with the business. So as you said, we're no longer thinking about maybe the source code of a blockchain because they said it's developed by open source organization, whatever that is. But it's what are we going to use it for? Data, security, privacy, the business model, the economic model, all those kind of things. The business can't understand that from a technical point of view, and the technical folk need the business to understand the market. So it's really seen a convergence of the business and IT like we've never seen before. Now, unfortunately, a lot of organizations still have the IT function siloed away from the business, and they don't talk, they don't get on, they don't understand. But I think that's going to collapse very quickly. And I think during this crisis times, we're going to see an amazing um, I guess, collaboration or joining of IT and the business like we've never seen before because we're just going to have to do that. We don't have to build the tech anymore. We just have to get it, use it, align it to the business and go try it out. If it doesn't work, we don't get penalized. It's we go do something else. So this fail fast thing as well, rather than penalize IT for not getting it right and taking dollars back or whatever that is. So I think that comes into this again. You're looking at trust and transparency, not the source code of a blockchain. But equally, there are different types of chains out there, as you said, different vendors, different codes. It does different things. So you really have to understand what type of blockchain do you want for the environments that you're going to use.
correct, correct. By the way, Mark, your summary there was brilliant. One of the best summaries I've heard. The way you talked about aligning IT and business, right? Because let's be very candid. Again, how many billions, maybe tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions
Yeah,
have been spent on this buzzword called aligning IT and business. And
yeah, yeah,
why has it been such a challenge? Because you have two worlds, and we are extrinsically trying to bring them together. And what makes this particular stack unique, the first economic stack, is because intrinsically we have the ability for the first time in the history of computing to drive that alignment inside, right?
yeah.
And that's what for me gets me excited. Aligning IT and business. Now, I'll tell you a story if you have some time. So,
Sure,
working with this large shipping company, and we shall not names, we shall protect the
that's
guilty.
okay.
So, so they designed this system using blockchain technologies to basically track containers all the way through from, in this case, from Japan to Tokyo to Seattle.
Yes.
And so we know they rolled the application out, and what happened? We had these people out in the front lines. So they was used to using Excel spreadsheets to store the data, the numbers, the log, and the app was rolled out, and nobody cared. And so on Friday morning, the intern came in, and he was tasked with copying the data from the Excel spreadsheet to the app. And I was like, yeah, you go take care of it, right? And this is the challenge of aligning IT and business. Back in the days, if you remember history, rolling out, for example, SharePoint. We would roll out SharePoint. We'd say, please use it. Please use
Yes.
the new version. It is better. It is more productive. There's more privacy built in, and eventually, people would use it. The difference here is this. In this case, for the shipping company, because we had the incentive model built in, the company could track every day, every week, and see in terms of the data entry, the validation. And what happened? Friday morning, 9 to 12, there was a spike because that was when the interns came in and copied it from Excel.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So,
There is some lessons in there, all right. Yes. Yes.
right.
But
So anyway, to make a long story short, being able to see, to manifest these incentives, and then be able to go back and say, guys, look, this is not how this was supposed to have been used, right? Whereas 5 years ago, 3 years ago, we'd have said, look, hey, that's the way it is, man. Hire an expensive consultant and let's hope they can fix this governance issue. But now it's different.
absolutely, now it's different. And I said, I think we've been pulled into a new world of different by 5, 10 years. So what got us here today doesn't get us there tomorrow. And that type of thing, as you said, the old days of bringing in the consultants, putting out new SharePoint, whatever that was. I've seen so many of them, and as you said, people go, so what? And they go back to the old way. And
Correct.
eventually it might get populated, but then it doesn't get up. And technology for the sake of technology. So it's good, I think, with blockchain is to understand why. Not so much why you want to use it, but what are those? Go find some good use cases. I love the coffee bean from bean to cup. Apply that to any business and say from there to there, and then look at what they're doing, what they're transacting, what they're auditing, what they're credentialing along the way, what trust and transparency is doing.
Yeah,
Now take that thinking into your business and then go find your bean to cup. I
that's right.
think that's a good plan.
Very well said.
John, we
Very well
some thanks. Oh yeah, you're so kind to me there. I'll buy 5 books when they're out. You've been so kind.
said. Thank you.
I'll return 4 though.
Thank you.
So John, we're going to finish shortly, but I have a couple of quick fire questions. So again, we'll just see how we get on here. Um, Question one: Is blockchain overhyped? Do you think?
Absolutely. I think we tend to hype everything. And for sure,
No, no
blockchain,
shame.
yes, it is certainly hyped. I mean, otherwise I would be lying to you. It is, of course, overhyped.
Indeed. Is a blockchain going to change the world?
Absolutely, absolutely. In ways we can't even fathom at this point.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
again, for me, privacy, Mark, privacy, as it becomes more and more paramount in our lives, we will see blockchain transform every facet of life as we know it.
I believe that too. I think it'll take years to come around, but in whatever amount of time that is, we're going to look back and say, "Oh my God, I never thought it would be used here, 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 here." But you can apply that to a lot of technologies we have today. If you look back in history, well, I never thought we could use that here, here, and here. If
True.
you apply that to the global crisis that's happening now and how inventive people are getting to help get medical equipment and protective gear, you would think, I would never have thought using technology to create that, to do that, or do that. So
True.
hindsight is wonderful, but we've try and get ahead of it and figure out, you know, never waste a crisis, people say, and maybe if for organizations, don't waste your crisis here. Look for those opportunities while trying to survive. We have to do that as well. We didn't go into Bitcoin, but Bitcoin and blockchain get mentioned quite a lot. So Bitcoin is a game changer, yes or no, or what it represents?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we can only watch the central banks to know how much of a game changer Bitcoin has been
Yeah,
already.
yeah. Yeah, and I think especially the last 8 weeks, I tend to use not a lot of it, but I've not used any cash I have not been able to go out anywhere to spend it or get it. But I hear lots of reports about now people even saying when we go back to whatever the new normal is, they won't be handling cash because of the fear it can carry germs and things. It will be tap tap. That will evolve into, I think, what you're suggesting there, cryptocurrencies from central banks. I think we're going to see that accelerated as well. They're going to have to think about it quicker, better, sooner as
Definitely,
well, because it's the
definitely.
way it's going. And Bitcoin shows it can work. Look, like with cash, you can have money laundering, you can have an abuse of the cash system can happen in a Bitcoin, but there's probably a bit more transparency and there needs to be a bit more protocols built in. But I think that's the way. Um, I guess I think we mentioned it before, but the final question, the current global emergency that's going on, um, is it going to change how companies view and use blockchain? I think we've covered that, but I think it's a solid. I think it will overall.
Absolutely, Mark. Absolutely. I mean, like we said, in terms of trust, right? What is lacking in the supply chains, right, is trust,
Mm,
and
mm,
being able to address trust. And on the flip side, being able to provide and guarantee privacy to the individual, to the consumer,
yeah.
to the citizen. This balancing act, I think, places blockchain uniquely in terms of where we are as the IT industry. Absolutely.
I love that. Yeah, it's a balancing act, as you said, transparency, governance, and also you just related that now to the citizens
Yes.
of the world as well, which I think is a great leap. John, we're going to finish, but before we do, have you any final words on how digital technologies such as cloud, IoT, big data, blockchain are relevant for the times we find ourselves in now?
Most certainly, Mark. I mean, as a technologist, as a guy who loves technology, absolutely. I think we live. I believe this. I think we are living in one of the most interesting times ever in history
Mm,
in terms of what we could do for people, for the man in the street, and what we could do for our society. And so I see, obviously, cloud, we've seen the last 5, 7, 10 years, IoT devices, and certainly for me as a blockchain proponent, the potential to build the next wave of capabilities to enable us to live as human beings, to enable us to live as communities, as societies, and certainly as the global world. For me, this we haven't seen the best yet, Mark. I mean, this is nothing. I mean, the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years. I mean, we should have another talk. Maybe, obviously we will talk. But I see the next couple of years, and I see enormous potential. Tremendous energy for what it is that we will do, as individuals and as commercial entities. And for me, having this first economic stack in history is the base building block of almost everything we will do. And so you
yeah.
can see, I mean, this is for me, and this is, yeah, it's a strange time we live in, but I think we'll come out. We always do. We believe in the potential of our future. We always do.
We always do. And again, I think the challenge is what is the new norm. But again, that's the challenge we have to embrace. I think, as I said, these technologies, it was good you related the technologies to both business and citizens and people because it's going to enhance our lives as well. The
Yes,
solutions that organizations come up with for our betterment. I think we've yet to see and imagine what a lot of this is, but certainly we've been accelerated 5 or 10 years. It's like Doctor Who's time machine. We've been accelerated into the future. Hey, John.
absolutely. Very well said.
Um, so John, we're going to finish up. I'm going to put in 5 orders for your book. We'll get you back on to talk about that when it comes out.
Thank you,
And John,
sir.
in finishing, John deVadoss, thank you so much for joining us on today's CCC Talks. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.